Some of the most dangerous criminals in the US find themselves wanted by the FBI. No matter how long ago a crime may have been committed, they won't be able to live a normal life until justice has been served. Anyone with information on any of these cases can contact the FBI at 1-800-225-5324. One disturbing FBI case involves a man believed to have taken the life of his girlfriend more than 40 years ago. On October 10, 1981, a motorist driving through Norton, Massachusetts on Route 123 came across the body of 21-year-old Robin Shea. She had a single bullet wound to her chest and had been pushed out of a moving vehicle. According to the FBI, that vehicle had been driven by her boyfriend, Andrew Peter Dabbs. Dabbs was 20 years Robin's senior and was already married with 2 children. Robin's family wasn't aware of either of these things, but still didn't get good vibes from him. Then they discovered that he had been physically hurting her, something she tried to keep from them. The FBI believes that the couple had been driving through Norton when Dabbs attacked Robin for the final time. What caused him to commit such a disturbing act, or if there was even a trigger at all, remains unknown. After pushing Robin out of the car, Dabbs carried on driving. By the time her body was found, he had disappeared without a trace. A month after the attack, a state arrest warrant was issued against Dabbs, but police had no idea where he was. The following year, a federal arrest warrant was issued, and the FBI got involved. Today, there's a reward of $20,000 for information leading to Dabbs' arrest. He was 5'10" and 180 pounds at the time of the disappearance, and has skin grafts on his leg from a burn. Authorities believe someone knows where Dabbs is, and they hope that they will allow Robin's family to get justice after all these years. Juan Garza is a dangerous criminal that the FBI has been searching for more than 35 years. Over the years, there has been little publicity in the search for Garza, but his crimes make him a strong candidate for a spot on the most wanted list if he's not found soon. It was October 21st, 1984, when Garza became a wanted man. The crime took place in Belle Glade, Florida. He'd been arguing with a group of men, though the subject of the argument was never made public. At one point, he drew a weapon and attacked 2 of the men that he was arguing with. Ricardo Chavez and his older brother, Juan, were both struck with bullets. Ricardo would pass away. Juan was seriously injured, but managed to make a recovery. The crime didn't remain a mystery for long, though. The January after the crime took place, Garza was identified as the person responsible, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. But by this time, he had already disappeared. The FBI soon joined the investigation into the case. A search of the local area confirmed that Garza was no longer in Belle Glade, and in his arrest warrant it was stated that he might have been in Mexico or Texas. Garza had been born in Mexico, but had spent much of his life living in Mercedes, Texas. He still had family and property there, and he also had connections to 2 other towns in the area. But searches of these locations turned up no clues as to where he may have been. Before long, the case went cold. It didn't get much publicity at the time, and there were few pushes for information in the decades that followed. However, the FBI never closed the case, and in 2017, they confirmed that they were still looking for the criminal. An updated wanted poster was released with age-progressed photos showing what Garza may look like all these years later. There was little additional information about the crime that he had committed. The poster reiterated that he was wanted for taking the life of one man and attempting to take the life of another, as well as unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. It's estimated that Garza was between 5'7" and 6 foot, and weighed between 170 and 200 pounds. He had black hair when he disappeared, but given he would be in his late 60s today, the age progression images show him with graying hair. He should be considered armed and dangerous, and anyone with information should contact their nearest FBI office. Cybercrime is one of the biggest growing crimes around the world. and one of the most important ones that the FBI investigates. What makes cybercrime so dangerous is its connections to illegal espionage and organized crime. The consequences often go much deeper than some stolen money, though. In 2018, the US government announced it had identified 2 of the people involved in the APT-10 group. APT-10, or Advanced Persistent Threat 10, is a group of individuals with ties to the Chinese government. Beginning in at least 2006, the organization has hacked companies and government agencies around the world. This was usually done by the stereotypical method of a malicious email sent to personnel at managed service providers and other companies. The emails were tailored to the specific individual and included malware which would infect their network. The organization also goes by the name Red Apollo and targeted NASA and the US Navy, as well as companies from a variety of other sectors. Hundreds of gigabytes of sensitive data had been stolen, including identifying information about 100,000 people working for the US Navy. Zhu Hua and Zhang Shilong were the 2 individuals identified by the US. Both worked for a technology company that was based in China. Zhu was responsible for registering malware domains, hacking infrastructure, and recruiting new members to the organization. Zhang also registered domains and infrastructure, and tested and developed malware that was used by the group. APT-10 likely includes many other members that may never be identified. The FBI believes that the group works with the Chinese Ministry of State Security. China denies this, but has apparently made little effort to help the US apprehend the hackers. The FBI has little hope of ever capturing members of APT-10, unless they decide to take a trip to the US in the future, but they do still publicize the case. It was almost 40 years ago when a man named William Jr. Jordan disappeared without a trace. The disappearance made him one of the FBI's most wanted criminals. Jordan had been in prison when he vanished, serving a life sentence for taking the life of another man. The initial crime had taken place in 1974. It was a cool March evening in Georgia, and James Rouse Jr. was on his way home from a lecture that he had given at a local college. He stopped in at a hotel to call his wife to let her know he would be home late. It's believed after that he went to the hotel bar where he met Jordan and Anthony Previtt. Unbeknownst to James, Jordan and Previtt were on the run for another crime spree in North Carolina. They were wanted for multiple cases of breaking and entering, and had fled to Georgia in a stolen car. The 3 men left the bar together, and it seems like James had offered them a ride, but then the 2 criminals pulled out weapons and kidnapped James. When he didn't return home, James's family alerted authorities. It would be a few days before his body was discovered. In the meantime, police received a tip that Jordan and Previtt were with a friend. Authorities tried to stake out the house that they were in, but the criminals made their escape. A high-speed chase followed, but eventually the criminals were caught. When James's body was found, police realized the 2 men were responsible. They had forced James out of his car and made him walk through the woods until they came to a lake where they finally took his life. Jordan insisted Previtt had been the one to pull the trigger, but in the end they were both found guilty for taking his life and earned life in prison. Jordan became a model prisoner, and years later, he would be moved to a low-security prison. He was allowed off-site on work details. On August 6, 1984, Jordan was out on one of these jobs picking blueberries at a farm. For some reason, he was given the keys to one of the prison vehicles and sent to a gas station to fill it up, and another prisoner went with him. Much to the guard's surprise, the men didn't return. The other prisoner who had escaped with Jordan was arrested soon after. He said Jordan was headed to his mother's house. By the time police were sent to the house, Jordan had already disappeared. He hasn't been seen since. Today, Jordan would be in his late 70s. According to the officers involved in the case, they believe he may look like a kind old grandpa today. But the FBI warned that he should be considered armed and dangerous. Given how much time has passed, Jordan could be pretty much anywhere. but Virginia and West Virginia were highlighted as possible locations by authorities. Jordan was 6'2" at the time of his disappearance, and the FBI estimates that his weight is at about 135 pounds. He had numerous tattoos, including a skeleton on his right forearm, a spider on his right upper arm, a cross on his left forearm, and Louise on his left leg. For years, Fain Alan Smika remained a missing suspect in a disturbing cold case. The crime took place in the 1980s, but it wasn't until 2010 that a warrant for his arrest was issued. By then, Smika had been missing for decades. Fain was a 24-year-old university dropout in 1983 when he answered an ad placed in a local paper by Sid Wells. Sid was a University of Colorado student living in Boulder and looking for an extra roommate for the flat that he shared with his brother Sam. Fain was from a neighboring town, and at first the brothers thought he was trustworthy. After he moved in, they found him to be antisocial, and he would often miss rent payments. He was also believed to be selling illegal substances. August 1st, 1983 was rent day, and Fain was supposed to hand over some money to Sid. Sam Wells was out that day, but came back from a camping trip to find his brother's body on the floor. He had already passed away, and he suffered from a single bullet wound. Sam was in shock but managed to call police. Fain quickly became a suspect. Police found him at his mother's house and interviewed him there. There, they found the same weapon that had been used to take Sid's life. On October 6th, Fain was arrested for the crime, but the case wouldn't go any further. Prosecutors didn't believe they had enough evidence to convict Fain. He had the same type of weapon that had been used to take Sid's life, and there definitely appeared to be motive, but it wasn't enough to prove beyond reasonable doubt that he had been the person responsible. Sid's family were shocked when Fain was released from custody. They couldn't see who else could have been responsible. Their suspicions seemed to be confirmed when, in 1986, Fain vanished without a trace. His car was found in Beverly Hills, wiped clean of prints, and with a stolen license plate. No trace of Fain has ever been found. In the years after his disappearance, police and the FBI have continued to try to solve the cold case surrounding Sid's passing. With new technology, evidence was re-examined, and in 2010 an arrest warrant was issued. By this point, investigators believed he'd been living under a fake name for 24 years. The FBI still hopes that someone might know where the missing man is today. Fain is described as being 5'11" and weighing 140 pounds. He had a thin frame and brown hair, which may have been sun-bleached golden in color. His FBI file notes that he may have lived in Jalapa, Mexico for years before 2007, and he has connections to California. One of the strangest missing person cases Interpol is trying to solve, which began this year, is the disappearance of Marbel Valenzuela Herrera. Marbel is a 37-year-old woman from the United States who disappeared in strange circumstances in April of this year. Marbel had been living in Chihuahua for a while before her disappearance. The rural town lies just across the border of Texas and is a relatively safe area. It was described as a contrast to the idea of the lawless land of cartels and smuggling, where residents felt safe. Marbel was raising her 4 children there, and was near to her family. On April 15, 2022, she went out with her boyfriend, a man named Eyler Cruz Silva. Cruz Silva was born in Cuba, and allegedly had the nickname of El Cubano, but was living in Mexico legally. Not much is known about him, whether he was involved in any illegal activity associated with the area, or how long he and Marbel had been in a relationship for. They left Marbel's home in her car. This was the last time that Marbel was seen or heard from. When Marbel didn't come home that night, her family was obviously worried. They couldn't get a hold of her by cell phone and contacted the police with the scary mystery. It was out of the question that Marbel would just abandon her children. And when they found her car abandoned, they knew that something was wrong. Local authorities contacted international police to try to solve the mystery. Cruz Silva was a person of interest, given he was the last person to have seen Marbel, and an arrest warrant was issued. He was charged with the forcible disappearance of Marbel, but no trace of Cruz Silva could be found. He was no longer in the city, and it seemed possible that he was no longer in Chihuahua at all. A few days later, the U.S. Marshals Service located Cruz Silva in Texas. He had illegally crossed into the country and was handed over to the Mexican authorities. Since Cruz Silva was located, there's been little update in the case. Marbel wasn't with him and still has not been located. A reward of 200,000 pesos, roughly 10,000 US dollars, has been issued for information that could help authorities solve this strange mystery. Marbel's friends and family continued to conduct searches for her, and a march took place on the 2-month anniversary to demand answers and to make the area a safer place. Marbel is described as being 164 centimeters tall and weighing 56 kilograms. She has brown hair, a scar on her right arm, and a number of tattoos, including Arabic letters on her back, a lotus flower on her neck, and a doll on a swing on her right wrist. The disappearance of an elderly Italian man is the subject of one of the strangest Interpol cases. Renato Ronzoni has been missing for more than 2 months. It's believed he was kidnapped by a woman who claimed to be his wife and taken from the country. Natalia Koshova was a Ukrainian woman who at one point had been a live-in carer for Renato's aunt. In September of 2019, the aunt passed away from natural causes. Without any children of her own, her home and estate was split between her nieces and nephews, including Renato. Natalia, who seems to have sometimes gone by the name Natasha, was left without an income or a home. It wasn't long before she moved in with Renato. They had met when Koshova was still a caregiver and had apparently fallen in love. In January of 2021, they traveled to Ukraine where they married. From the outside, it appeared to be a heartwarming story of a man finding love in his senior years. But to his family, it was much more sinister. Renato suffered from medical problems and cognitive issues, which his family believed made it easy for Koshova to take advantage of him. She and at least one friend moved in with him. According to the family, they controlled his money and pension, and he was forced to eat at a soup kitchen. A judge appointed a support administrator, a lawyer named Frederica Giorgi, to protect Renato from being taken advantage of. When the newly married couple returned to Italy, the lawyer intervened. The marriage was found to be not valid in Italy, possibly due to concerns over whether Renato could actually consent to it. But that didn't remove Koshova from his life. The two made another brief trip to Ukraine, while Renato's family and the lawyer worked on keeping Koshova away from him. In the end, a removal order was made against her and another woman, and Renato was banned from leaving the country. On April 11, 2022, police went to Renato's home to carry out the removal order. Unsurprisingly, Koshova and the other woman reacted badly, with one of the two pushing one of the police officers. Renato became confused, and the officers determined that they could not carry out the order under those circumstances. Hours later, a neighbor reported that a man had kicked down Renato's door, and Renato was seen being led out of the house by the two women. They were carrying a number of bags. Police arrived at the scene shortly after, but there was no sign of Renato. Some of his medication had been left behind, and a will was found, with Koshova as the main benefactor. Police believe that Renato was taken against his will to Poland. Koshova's daughter was located and questioned, and she said that her mother had called and claimed that they would return to Italy soon, but there was still no sign of them. Interpol is working with local law enforcement to try to locate the couple, as Renato's family worries for his safety. On August 20th, 2001, a man named Vesa Francila left the Finnish embassy in Warsaw after trying to get back into Finland. He told staff that he'd been robbed by what he called the EU police, but didn't want to report the crime. When he left the embassy, it was the last time that anybody saw him. 15 years after he vanished, somebody finally noticed Vesa was missing. The strange case of Vesa Francila began more than a decade before he vanished. Vesa had inherited a farmhouse from his father, but the local villagers had never wanted the Francilas in the area and appeared to go out of their way to make Vesa's life hard. Vesa reported multiple crimes and threats to the police, but the police would not investigate. When he tried to sue the local authorities for their inaction, he was put in a maximum security mental hospital against his will. It was only after a campaign by his elderly mother that he was released. From that point on, Vesa seemed to be very anti-authority and paranoid, especially about the police. After his mother passed, he bought a studio apartment. He was appointed a caretaker after he was declared mentally incapable, but the caretaker didn't seem too concerned with Vesa and didn't come to visit often. Vesa's issues weren't only in Finland. While on a holiday in Tanzania, the hotel he was staying in was attacked by armed robbers, and his money and belongings were stolen. But this wasn't where the strange mystery investigated by Interpol began. In July of 2001, Vesa booked and went on a package holiday to Crete. He was supposed to get a flight back to Finland on July 26th, but instead he traveled to Athens, where he visited the embassy on August 1st. He said he needed help getting back to Finland. He was given a train ticket to Bulgaria and began the journey home by train. The journey would have taken multiple train trips. On August 20th, he turned up in Poland claiming the ticket for his next trip, as well as his passport and money had all been stolen by the EU police. When asked if he wanted to report the crime, he referred to the police as criminals. For some reason, Vesa didn't get help at the embassy and was left alone. What happened to Vesa after that is a mystery. It's not known whether his story about the police stealing his belongings was actually true. He had a natural distrust of the police, and the story may have just been paranoia. But it also seemed like something did happen to Vesa that day that meant that he couldn't continue his journey. A direct debit from his account continued to pay the fees for his apartment. It was only when a ventilation technician gained access to do a service that anybody realized the apartment had been empty for 15 years. Inside, investigators found 15 years of mail, a large number of speakers, and a strange handwritten sign. Part of the sign read, quote, "My apartment is not connected to the power grid, and therefore it is not permissible to conduct electrical repairs or inspections while I'm away. The illegal and deadly electrical works of my apartment are my criminal evidence, and may be touched only when I am present." Vesa was declared legally passed in 2017, but what happened to him after 2001 remains a strange unsolved mystery. He remains on Interpol's list of missing people. On the Italian island of Ischia, there's a morbid legend about the ghost of a woman who haunts one of the beaches. Dressed in all black, she disappears into the ocean. Like many ghost stories, this one has a true horror story at its base, and it's one that Interpol has investigated. The Dama in Nero, or the Lady in Black, was an unidentified woman whose body was found on one of the island's beaches on October 1st, 1953. What's particularly strange about this case is that it seems she was alive and well not long before her body was found. However, there are lots of conflicting stories about this case, and it's easy to see how the Dama in Nero became a legend. Few things are known about the woman for sure. She had short blonde hair and was about 1.72 meters tall. She had traveled to the island via ferry earlier that day and had a conversation with a few people. She told people that she was from Bolzano, had English ancestry, and was married to an American soldier. In some sources, her husband is said to have passed away during the war. She was dressed well, but her shoes had been resoled, and her watch strap was worn. She also wore a gold necklace. While on the island, she told multiple people she was meeting a man with a mustache that was dressed in gray at 10 p.m. An hour before the meeting, she took a cab to Lago Ameno. The driver noted that she was carrying both a bag and a suitcase. As the 10 p.m. meeting drew closer, she seemed worried that the man wouldn't show up. She asked multiple people if they had seen a man in gray, but nobody had. Who found her body varies in different sources. In some sources, 2 women walking on the beach saw her. In others, she was found by 2 police officers. Her bag and suitcase were both missing, as was the gold necklace that she had been wearing. There doesn't seem to have been a proper search of the beach, but an empty bottle of sleeping pills was found nearby. Speculation about what could have happened to the woman began immediately. Some local papers reported an injury to her abdomen, but the official autopsy found that she had passed away due to drowning. Some sources say that sleeping pills were found in her system, leading people to conclude that she had fainted in the water. Others speculate that an autopsy never even took place. Only blurred photos of the body were taken, and no fingerprints were taken. International police tried to determine the identity of the woman, but nobody came forward with an answer. Almost 70 years later, it seems unlikely that this mystery will ever be solved. Marie-Agnes Cordonnier and Frances Bruyere were two young women who traveled to France to do some windsurfing. They vanished without a trace, leaving behind a strange unsolved mystery, which may be connected to one of the scariest mysteries in France. The two women were cousins from Belgium who arrived in Mâcon, France on August 20th, 1984. They called their parents back home to let them know that they were okay, and contacted a friend who lived nearby. Their plan was to hitchhike over to Lake Bouget after staying with their friend and his family for a couple of days. On August 22nd, they were dropped off back at Mâcon, where their friend took the last known photo of the two women. The women were due back home on August 31st, as they had a wedding to go to the following day, but it seems like their disappearance was noted before that point. Authorities were alerted that they hadn't contacted their family for a few days. Interpol was alerted, and a search for the two women began. Police were able to put together a timeline of events. They had hitchhiked to Bassins, not far from their intended destination. And it was on August 23rd that they'd contacted a Mr. X. This man was someone identified by police, but his name doesn't appear to have been made public. When Marie-Agnes and Frances first arrived in France, they had gotten a lift from a truck driver who had given them this number. Mr. X and the original driver weren't the same person, and the truck driver was cleared of any suspicion. Mr. X took the women to a bar, and the following day he returned to the bar alone. When asked how things had gone with the women, he told them that it went very bad. Marie-Agnes and Frances have never been found. Mr. X was naturally an obvious suspect and was the subject to police interviews. In 1993, he was arrested for the crime, but there wasn't enough evidence against him to charge him. He still remains the primary suspect in many people's eyes. He passed away in 2020, and if he does know what happened to the women, that information was taken to the grave with him. In the years that followed their disappearance, a number of other women vanished or had their lives taken around the A6 highway in France. Mâcon, where the women started and planned to end their trip, is connected to the highway, but it seems that they weren't anywhere near the A6 when they vanished. The scary, unsolved mystery still baffles police who have never found any trace of the women. In the space of just a few months, 3 people in India had their lives taken by an elusive serial killer. The criminal targeted the elderly and took valuables and jewelry from their bodies before disappearing into the night. He also seemed to go to great lengths to hide his identity, even taking bullet casings from the bodies to ensure no weapon experts would be able to determine the weapon that he was using. But just a few small mistakes revealed his identity to the police. The criminal would turn out to be 36-year-old Monish Naik. Naik had left his abusive father's home at a very young age, moving towns and picking up work as a dishwasher at a restaurant. As he grew older, he learned to cook and worked as a chef, as well as other odd jobs. But it wasn't enough money for Naik. He was involved in a variety of petty theft crimes. Between 1998 and 99, he spent about 2 years in jail after being arrested for a bike theft. He was never convicted, but Naik had nobody to bail him out, so he spent the time in jail until the case was dropped. While in jail, he met other criminals who taught him new tricks for making money, tricks he put to use after he was released. But to the outside world, he had turned his life around. He got married, had a son, and ran a restaurant with his wife. Things were going well, but Naik had ambitions for more. In 2016, he broke into the home of a railway ticket collector and stole a revolver and 37 bullets. The crime was reported to police, but police were never able to catch the thief. Naik used the weapon to hold up rich people. He selected elderly or infirm people, as he himself was a slight man and he wanted to ensure he couldn't be overpowered. After following them long enough to make sure they actually had valuables on them, he ambushed his victims in a secluded location and forced them to hand over jewelry. Anybody who resisted would find a bullet in their head. Between October of 2018 and January of 2019, 3 people passed away at Naik's hands. Despite the caution he took, there were 2 small mistakes Naik made. He knew the areas where he committed the crimes well, so he knew where CCTV cameras would be located. But he became careless after one of his crimes and went to a tea stall after taking the lives of one of his victims. His face was caught on camera at the stall, and while police couldn't be sure that this was the person responsible for the nearby crime, he was considered a person of interest. This prompted Naik to suddenly stop his crimes out of fear of being caught. He changed his appearance, growing a beard and cutting his hair, and even moved his family away from the area. His second mistake would prove to be much more costly. After a robbery gone wrong in February of 2019, Naik used his cell phone. Police linked the robbery to the other crimes and looked into the mobile numbers in the area where the crime had taken place. Naik's number was just one of those that police believed could possibly have belonged to the criminal. But when the phone was switched off shortly after the attack, it became even more suspicious. The phone suddenly became active again in September, and police acted on the hunch. They traced the phone to Naik's home, where he confessed to the crimes. He also confessed to taking the life of a 4th victim, a jewelry shop owner who had been buying his stolen goods. The son of Sal could hardly be described as a criminal genius, but he may have gotten away with taking the lives of 3 men if he had not been quite as careless as he was. Salvatore Perrone had a history of minor brushes with the law. He had previously been to court for accusations of trespassing, being drunk and disorderly, stalking, and burglary. He was also extremely disliked in the Staten Island neighborhood where he lived, but there was little to suggest he was capable of taking the life of an innocent person. Perrone was an independent apparel salesman by trade, working as a middleman to sell clothing to stores. It was a job that was not going well. Years earlier, he had run a successful clothing store and even trademarked his own name with the vision of creating a fashion line. But those dreams had pretty much died out, and he was living on very little money. It was through his work that he met the victims. What triggered his violent crimes is unknown. Perrone's neighbors described him as a loner with a short temper, but it didn't appear to be fits of anger that prompted his crimes. Instead, he went to the Bay Ridge store owned by a man named Mohammed Gabili near closing time on July 6, 2012, and took his life without any provocation. Perrone covered his body in clothing from the store and fled the scene. Over the next few months, the bodies of 2 more store owners were found in their own store. They had both been attacked shortly before closing time, and their bodies were found with bullet and knife wounds. It didn't take long for police to release a picture of the suspect. The stores Perrone had targeted had CCTV cameras, and police released footage of Perrone carrying a duffel bag that he used to carry his weapons. Not long after the attack, Perrone targeted a man that would have become his 4th victim. Luckily for the victim, customers disturbed the attack and Perrone fled the scene. But despite his image having been circulated in the local area, he had taken what had become his signature duffel bag with him to the scene, and so the victim knew that this was the criminal police were looking for. The victim was able to identify Perron to police, and police tracked him down at his girlfriend's apartment. There, they found the duffel bag and weapons he had used to commit his crimes, and there was even DNA evidence from 2 of the victims on the weapons and the bag. Perron initially confessed, claiming Italian and then Palestinian CIA agents had told him to commit the actions, then rescinded his confession and claimed he was being set up. He was found guilty of all 3 crimes and sentenced to life in prison. Juan Garza took the lives of at least 25 men in the early 1970s, and was only caught after preparing one of the burial sites a little too early. Garza was a Mexican migrant living in California. He had originally worked as a picker on a farm, but had started his own labor contractor business, supplying workers to other farms in the area. Compared to his brother, a homosexual man with violent tendencies, he seemed completely average. He had a wife and family, and didn't appear to have any run-ins with the law. That view on Garza quickly changed in 1971. In May of that year, a Japanese farmer hired Garza to arrange workers for his orchard. While the laborers were at work, the farmer took a walk through the orchard and found a grave-sized hole. The workers nearby either knew nothing about it or didn't say anything. There was nothing in the hole, but later that evening, the farmer went back to discover it had been filled in. Something didn't sit right with the farmer, and he contacted police. Police dug up the hole to find the body of Kenneth Whitaker. Kenneth had been violently attacked with a weapon, and a cross was cut into the back of his head. He was a transient worker and hadn't been reported missing by any friends or family. Before police could even really begin to investigate the crime, another body was discovered on the nearby farm. Another transient worker had been attacked in much the same manner as Kenneth and buried. The same day, another body was found. Excavation of the surrounding farmland discovered 25 bodies in less than a month. They had all been there less than half a year, and police couldn't be sure there weren't more older victims buried in the area. But they called off the excavation after number 25. Almost all the victims were transient workers who had been hired by Garza, but the biggest clue linking him to the crimes was buried with 2 of the bodies. With the body of Melford Sample, police found 2 receipts dated May 21st, signed by Garza. With one of the final bodies to be found, police found 2 bank deposit slips, along with his signature on them. Garza was arrested, but he claimed he was innocent. He put the blame on his brother, given there was some evidence homosexuality was involved in the crimes, but his brother had been out of the country when the crimes took place. He was found guilty of the crimes and eventually admitted that he'd committed the acts after being sentenced. Charles Sobrage earned the nickname the Serpent for his ability to evade capture. But it was one small mistake that turned him from a fugitive to a prisoner at one of the most overcrowded prisons in the world. Sobrage was born in Saigon to a Vietnamese mother and Indian father, though his parents split when he was very young and his mother remarried a French army officer. The young Sobrage moved to France, where he was educated at a private school. There, he would learn much of the charm that made him a successful con man when he grew up. As an adult, Sobrage traveled along the so-called hippie trail in Southeast Asia, charming tourists before giving them mood-altering substances and robbing them. He would acquire accomplices, mostly women, who he came across while trying to find new victims. But it wasn't long before his crimes escalated. It's not clear why Sobrage switched from simply robbing his victims to taking their lives. It's possible it started out as an accidental overdose before Sobrage realized that this was the best way to stop his victims from identifying him. But in the 1970s and 1980s, he would take the lives of dozens of young tourists. Most of his crimes occurred in Thailand, Malaysia, and India, but he was active as far west as Greece. Investigators were able to identify Sobrage long before they captured him. A stash of passports was found in the flat that he shared with a Canadian girlfriend. The passports were from a range of countries, and it would later be discovered they could all be matched to victims. Another tenant in the building where Subraj lived was able to provide investigators with important information, eventually the name of Subraj's girlfriend. His girlfriend's parents gave investigators details of an emergency contact in France, Subraj's mother, finally confirming the conman and criminal's identity. But getting their hands on the criminal was much harder. It wasn't until Thai authorities started to take the crime seriously and issued an Interpol notice that he was finally intercepted. This was when he made the mistake that would leave him no time to run from the authorities. Subraj was targeting a group of French tourists when he mixed up the doses of the substances he gave to them. The substance was much stronger than he had been expecting, and the tourists became violently ill in the lobby of the hotel where they were staying. The police were called and Subraj was captured. He was linked to cases in other parts of the world. It wouldn't be the last time Subraj was caught. He would escape from prison and the grasp of authorities multiple times in the following years, but is currently serving a life sentence in Nepal. Between 1999 and 2004, a string of violent crimes was taking place in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. In the span of 1 year, between January of 1999 and January of 2000, 4 women had their lives taken in a brutal fashion, their bodies severely disfigured after they had passed away. Their bodies were dumped in secluded places, sometimes posed in a way that suggested the culprit had a dark sense of humor. In other cases, so disfigured it was hard to tell if they were even human. Police had no clues to go on. Most of the victims were prostitutes, aged between 30 and 55 years old. There were no witnesses or any camera footage that could have given police anything to go on. Police did have some hairs that were found with some of the victims, but the DNA matched nobody in the database, so it led to a dead end. After a few months, the criminal took another victim's life, again leaving no clues behind. In 2003, another victim would be added to the total, and police also connected a 1994 crime that took the life of an 81-year-old woman in the same area. Despite the bodies piling up, police were no closer to catching the criminal. That same year, police believed that they may have gotten a break in the case. A man named Derek Todd Lee was arrested for taking the lives of 7 other women in the Baton Rouge and Lafayette areas of Louisiana. Investigators and the local media began to speculate that he may have been involved in more unsolved crimes, even though the modus operandi didn't exactly line up. However, the hairs found with some of the bodies didn't match Lee, and police began to realize there had been 2 serial killers targeting women in the area. In 2004, another victim was discovered, but this time there was another clue that would lead to the criminal's capture. Tire tracks were found near the body. A cast was taken of the tracks and the tire treads were examined. It was determined a relatively rare Goodyear tire had created the tracks, and police worked with stores in the area to narrow down a list of about 600 people who could have been responsible for the crime. All were brought in for questioning and to have their DNA tested. Even before the DNA test came back, there was one man that caught police's attention. Sean Vincent Gillis was a man in his 40s from Baton Rouge. He had been a strange and angry child and had grown into an angry adult, especially after his mother left to pursue film work in other parts of the country. It was stress that had driven him to attack his first victim, but he couldn't explain why he had taken the lives of the other women. He called himself pure evil after he confessed to the crimes and showed no remorse. Those said if he was released, he would probably go on to commit other heinous acts. Haunted dolls have inspired countless horror stories. Real-life haunted dolls are rarely as terrifying as the likes of Chucky. But the idea that there may be something thinking and feeling inside such a humanoid container is definitely eerie. Of course, Japan has its own haunted doll story. The doll, named Okiku, resides in the Manenji Temple in Hokkaido. It's about 40 centimeters tall and dressed in a traditional pink kimono. Many that have seen the doll in person remark on its dark black eyes and how lifelike its face is. And depending on when you might visit, the hair length can vary from above its shoulders to down to its waist. The most common story surrounding the doll is that it was purchased in 1918 and given to the buyer's little sister. It became her favorite doll. When she passed away the following year, her parents wanted to bury the doll with her, but weren't allowed. Instead, they created a shrine in their own home, which was typical at the time, and placed the doll in it. Over time, they noticed the doll's once neat haircut had become longer and uneven. It was as if it had grown naturally. More typical haunting signs followed. The parents were visited by their daughter in dreams, and would sometimes wake to find the doll in the same room as them. Lights would flicker, unexplained banging could be heard, and sometimes the family would hear unidentified voices. Activity would get particularly strange around certain dates, like the girl's birthday. They spoke to spiritual leaders in their community and came to the conclusion that their daughter was with them, inside the doll, but it wasn't seen as something horrific. For them, it was nice to have her there in spirit, and they took good care of Okiku, a name given to the doll by the daughter. Eventually, in 1938, the family had to move away to the mainland for work. They didn't want to take the doll with them, as they thought Okiku drew power from being close to their daughter's physical resting place. Instead, they gave it to the temple, where it's now kept inside a glass case. Once a year, the doll's hair is cut, as was requested by Okiku in a dream one of the priests had. It can be visited, but photography is forbidden. What started out as a scary horror story turned into something much less terrifying, but just as confusing of a mystery, when in 1968, an unidentified individual stole 300 million yen from an armored car. The 300 million yen robbery, as it's been dubbed, began with a dark setup on December 6, 1968. The manager of the Nippon Trust Bank received a threatening letter. He was to hand over 3 million yen, or his home and place of work would be attacked. Naturally, the manager contacted police. A stakeout of the handover spot took place, but nobody showed up. It looked like the threat was fake and there was nothing to worry about. That all changed the following Tuesday. As businesses were preparing for the holiday season, many were taking out large sums of money that would be bonuses for employees. Toshiba Corporation was one such company. And on December 10th, an armored car was loaded with 300 million yen to be transported from the Nippon Trust Bank to their headquarters. As the 4 guards transported the money, they were stopped by a police officer on a motorcycle. The officer told them that the threats against the manager had been very real, and their place of work in the manager's home had been attacked. While the men were trying to come to terms with the devastating news, the police officer gave them one more piece of terrifying information. There was reason to believe the car they were driving had been targeted. The officer got under the car to inspect it. As he did so, the bank employees saw smoke and flames coming out from beneath the car. They ran for cover while the officer jumped in the car and drove away. The officer and the money would never be seen again. After a few moments, the bank employees realized they had been duped. There was no police officer, there were no attacks on the bank, and the flare that was left in the middle of the road explained the smoke coming from the car. A massive investigation was launched into one of the biggest robberies Japan had ever seen. The cost of the investigation would eventually total more than the money that had been stolen. The culprit was never caught. People go missing in the wilderness all the time, and usually there isn't anything too mysterious about it. Even when the missing person is found in a location that's already been searched, it's not too much of a surprise. Search teams can often miss things, and people don't always stay put. But the disappearance of Iwamora Kenji, and the manner in which he was eventually found, is one of the stranger Japanese mysteries. Most people hadn't heard of Iwamora until years after he vanished. In July of 1989, 2 hikers from Tokyo took a trip to Asahidake, the tallest peak on Japan's northernmost island. The 2 hikers got stuck after a flash flood. When they didn't return as expected, search parties were sent to try to find them. One of the police helicopters sent to look for the pair came across a large SOS sign made out of birch logs near a river. Figuring it had been made by the missing hikers, the helicopter circled the area and eventually discovered them in a cave about 2 to 3 kilometers north. The 2 men were unconscious, but in relatively good health, and were soon rescued. There was only one problem. When the hikers were praised for their ingenuity in creating the sign that saved them, both denied knowing anything about it. Thinking there was someone else in trouble, search teams returned to Asahidake, but there wasn't a recent disappearance that they would solve. Near the sign, police found skeletal remains and a knapsack containing a number of items. There was no ID in the pack, but police did find a Walkman and cassette tapes. Most of the tapes were typical music recordings, but one contained an eerie recording of a man calling for help. In the chilling recording, the man shouts his SOS message. The message said, "I can't move from atop this cliff. SOS, please help. I am near where the helicopter was originally, and I can't move further due to bamboo brush being in the way. Please get me out of here." A journalist looking into the case eventually found some more items hidden in a hole under some tree roots, including the ID of Iwamora Kenji. Iwamora had gone missing in 1984 at the age of 25. He had been staying at a nearby lodge and was reported missing when he failed to check out. It would be 5 years before he was found. The bones were originally thought to be from a woman, but were eventually identified as Iwamora's remains. He had broken bones before he passed away, leaving behind questions as to how he created the SOS message if he did. The message was huge, 18 meters long, 5 meters wide, and 5 meters high. There was also indication of some of the logs being cut with tools, but none were found nearby. It seems unlikely Iwamora would have been able to do this with broken bones. One possibility is that he injured himself after making the sign, but that does leave the question how he managed to be able to make the sign but not get back to the lodge. The tape is also very strange. Some sources claim he was found with a hiking boombox, which wasn't too uncommon. He could have made the tape to amplify his call for help. However, the tape wasn't found in the boombox. Others have said that he may have been hallucinating and believed the Walkman was actually a walkie-talkie. What helicopter he was talking about is also a mystery. Much like Eastern Europe and other parts of Asia, Japan was a place of political flux during the end of World War II. Between the occupation from America and other Allied forces, and the returning of hundreds of thousands of soldiers from war, there was a lot of change in the political landscape. The Japanese National Railways became the face of much of the change. During the war, new recruits had been brought in to replace those that had joined the army or gone to occupied land in Korea and Manchuria. When those people returned at the end of the war, the number of people working at JNR doubled to 600,000. Americans were brought in to try to manage Japan's post-war development and demanded a cut in the number of government workers, and JNR was in the firing line. Some 30,000 people were facing redundancy in July of 1949. Fears about the growth of communism had led to a crackdown on unions, which only further angered the railway workers. That was what Sadanori Shimoyama was dealing with when he disappeared on July 5th. Satonori was the first president of the JNR and had been in the role for about a month when he had to make staffing cuts. He had received threats to his life in that time and was himself not happy with the role he was going to have to play. But still, on July 4th, he released the names of 30,400 people who would be losing their jobs. On July 5th, he was heading to the JNR headquarters for an important meeting, though he was in no rush to get there. On his way to work, he asked his driver to stop at a store, only to find the store hadn't opened yet. They instead drove to the bank, then came back around to the store once it was open. At around 9:40 a.m., 40 minutes after the meeting was due to start, Satonori got out of the car and told his driver to wait 5 minutes. He disappeared into the shop and wasn't seen again. Police were alerted to Satonori's disappearance when he didn't show up for work. There were a handful of sightings of someone who looked like the missing man, but nobody could be sure it was him. Finally, at just after midnight the following morning, his body was found on the railway tracks. It was determined he'd been struck at about 20 minutes past midnight. However, coroners couldn't decide whether he was still alive at that point. The scene of the incident was much cleaner than would have been expected, and coroners found internal injuries, which may have been a sign that he was attacked by someone before being struck. The results of a police investigation were never publicly released, and it was later closed. Some believe Satonori was attacked in retaliation for the job losses, while others believe it was part of a plan to discredit left-wing politicians. The Shimoyama incident remains one of JNR's 3 biggest mysteries, along with the train derailment and the Mitaka incident. On its own, the events of March 11, 2011 were terrifying enough to be a horror story. A 9.1 magnitude earthquake struck off the east coast of Japan just before 3 p.m. The earthquake lasted an incredible 6 minutes. The earthquake triggered a tsunami, which caused further devastation and caused a meltdown at the Fukushima power plant. Altogether, the disaster caused the biggest single loss of life in Japan since the end of World War II. Almost 20,000 people were confirmed to have lost their lives, and a further 2,500 people remain missing. But the tragedy of that day left paranormal aftershocks for the communities most impacted by the disaster. Ishinomaki was a coastal city in northern eastern Japan. It was mostly devastated by the tsunami. More than 3,000 people lost their lives in the disaster, and almost as many remain unaccounted for. Most of the city was completely destroyed, and the population had to be relocated so the city could be rebuilt. In the months after the disaster, it figuratively and literally became a ghost town. The most famous ghost stories to have come from the city came from taxi drivers interviewed by a sociology student. Many had ghostly experiences, passengers who would vanish into thin air. One chilling story was told by a taxi driver who picked up a woman in the middle of summer. Despite the warm weather, she was wearing a thick coat, much more suitable to the freezing temperatures of March. She was also soaking wet. She got into his taxi and asked to be taken to the Minamiyama district. Like most of the city, Minamiyama had been badly hit by the disaster and was largely abandoned. When the taxi driver told the woman that the area was empty and asked if she was sure she wanted to go there, the woman didn't answer. After a long pause, she asked, "Have I died?" The driver turned to confront her, only to find that she had vanished. Another story is that of an anxious man who kept pointing fingers when asked where he wanted to go. He eventually gave the destination of Hioriyama, a mountain park. When they eventually arrived, the taxi driver turned to get his fare, only to find that the man had vanished. These stories were recorded in the driver's logs, where they noted the missing fares they would have had. Other stories to come from the community included possessions, a man who would not go out in the rain as he saw the victims looking up at him from every puddle, and a school haunted by students. Some have put the stories down to a collective trauma, grief, and survivor's guilt. A more supernatural take points to the Japanese Shinto religion, which believes people who aren't given a proper funeral linger as spirits. Whether ghosts or psychological, the tsunami ghosts were real to those who experienced them, and a city of lost souls definitely sounds more terrifying than any horror story. For more than 40 years, the family of Vicky Dilooi have been trying to solve the unsolved mystery of who took the life of their loved one. Vicky was 25 years old in 1981 and worked as a nurse. She was the much-loved older sister to 3 siblings and was like a second mother to her nephew. She had married a man named Tony Dilooi a few years earlier, but the marriage hadn't worked out, and she was in the process of getting a divorce at the time that her true crime story began. Vicky had moved back in with her parents in Jefferson County, Ohio, and had only been living there a few days when, in April of 1981, she went for a jog. She left the house at about 4 p.m. on April 20th, taking her car and driving to a nearby fast food restaurant. After eating there, she drove to Fernwood Forest, where she often went jogging. When Vicky didn't return home from the woods, her parents filed a missing person report in the morning. It wasn't long before search teams made the devastating discovery. Vicky was found in the woods, dumped over the embankment. Forensic investigators determined a round had gotten her at close range, after which somebody moved her again before she was found in the woods by the search team. The town where Vicky went missing was only a small community, and everyone was shocked at the discovery. Vicky was well liked and known as someone who would always try to help others. She had only just finished a 48-hour shift as an on-call nurse when she went missing in the woods. As far as anybody knew, she didn't have any enemies, and nobody could think of a reason why someone would want to do this to her. Police believed the person responsible for the strange case was someone that Vicky knew well. She had let them get close to her before they turned on her. Many of Vicky's close friends were questioned, as well as her estranged husband, and a number of polygraph tests were taken. All of them were ruled out as suspects in her missing person case. Years later, Vicky's family kept up the push for answers, and local police worked hard to try to solve the mystery. When Vicky's parents passed away, her siblings and nephew took up the fight for the unsolved case to be explained. Some evidence, including fingernail clippings, were collected at the time of the crime, and have recently been resubmitted for forensic testing. In 2021, on the 40th anniversary of her true crime story, police renewed efforts and started interviewing old and new suspects. Since then, however, there's been no update, and her strange case is still waiting to become a solved mystery. Anyone with information on this unsolved case should contact Jefferson County, Ohio Sheriff's Office at 740-283-8600. A disturbing true crime story from Iowa has remained an unsolved mystery for more than 40 years. Roger Atkinson and Rose Burkert were on a romantic getaway, but it ended with an unknown person taking their lives on September 12, 1980. Despite a large police investigation, the criminal responsible was never found. Roger and Rose were having an affair. Roger was a married man and a devout Christian who had met Rose during his work as a telephone installer and repairman. They had begun to see one another and would go on trips away while Roger's wife thought that he was on a work trip. Rose was a single mother of a young daughter. She had recently separated from an ex-boyfriend who had not taken the breakup well. The man, Danny Burton, had been following her, and weeks before the terrible crime, she had told police that if anything happened to her, he would be responsible for her mysterious disappearance. The two lovers went to a Holiday Inn in Amana. They hadn't called ahead and found the hotel was fully booked for a mortician's conference. People had come from all over the country to attend. However, the front desk found that there had been a cancellation, and Roger and Rose stayed in the room furthest away from the desk. It could only be accessed from inside the hotel. After checking in, Rose called her friend, who was looking after her daughter. The friend was working, so asked if she could call back. She phoned Rose back at 8:30 p.m., but missed her. The couple were only supposed to stay one night, but they were missing at checkout. When housekeeping came around midday on September 13th, the two missing people were found in their room, and by way of a sharp instrument, they had ceased to be. A forensic examination of marks on Roger's hands showed a defensive struggle had taken place. He was found on his stomach, and it appeared that Rose had been turned over by someone afterwards. Both were covered in a comforter. The room appeared to have been ransacked, but nothing was missing. The contents of Roger's wallet had been tossed onto the floor. A bar of soap had been carved into, and a mysterious message had been written on the mirror in the bathroom. Only the word "this" remained when investigators arrived. A tube of toothpaste had been emptied into the bathtub. There was no sign of forced entry, and the chairs in the room were pulled out, almost as if two people had been having a conversation before the crime occurred. Hundreds of people, including all the morticians who had come from the conference, were interviewed, but nobody had seen anything out of the ordinary. Rose's ex-boyfriend was questioned, but he had an alibi. There are numerous theories to explain this mystery, from Rogers' wife and father-in-law wanting to get revenge, to connections to another unsolved crime very similar to this, where a man named William Kyle had his life taken from him in an Illinois hotel weeks earlier. In that case, a man named Raimundo Esparza was identified as a suspect, but only circumstantial evidence connected him to the unexplained events. The mysterious crime against Rose and Roger went cold, but this could one day become a solved cold case. DNA from an unidentified male was found in the bathroom. There is hope that it will one day be used to explain this unsolved mystery. One of the most mysterious true crime stories occurred in Brooklyn, New York in 1979. Carol Marin and her boyfriend Howard Green strangely disappeared at some point towards the end of the year. The mystery of what happened to the couple was eventually solved on December 16th, when a boy walking his dog in New Jersey found the bodies of the couple. They had been wrapped in canvas and rugs and dumped at the location, but this was far from a normal true crime story. Both Carol and Howard had been struck on their left sides, after which a veterinarian needle was used on them, over 30 times each. They had been completely drained. Hair from an unidentified individual was found in the hands of both Carol and Howard. Local police determined that the crime had taken place in the Brooklyn apartment shared by the couple. There, according to the New York police detective in charge of the case, the apartment was a mess, and many items linked to scary underground cults were found. However, the officers from New Jersey who were investigating the case said that the apartment was neat and tidy. There were other discrepancies between the two police forces, and both thought that the other was leading the investigation on the case. This led to the true crime case being forgotten about for decades. It wasn't until 2002, when the New York Post asked for answers, that the mistake was discovered. It was then found that the physical file for the case had also gone missing. With the police blunders, it seemed unlikely the mystery behind this strange case would be solved unless someone came forward with information. At the time, there was only one potential suspect spoken about. A neighbor allegedly had the hobby of draining mice, much in the same way that they were discovered. He denied this scary story and told reporters that he'd been on a hitchhiking vacation in Texas at the time of the crime. The scary cult paraphernalia that was allegedly found in the couple's apartment supposedly connected to the Order of the Oriental Templars, and an anonymous individual wrote to a journalist covering the cult that Carol had been asking about the cult, and that the cult was involved in the crime. However, evidence for this does not appear to exist now, if it ever did. In 2013, Eric Smith strangely disappeared under mysterious circumstances and hasn't been seen since. He was an experienced hunter, and before he became a missing person, he was last seen heading into the woods by his wife on November 8, 2013. Woods on his property that he knew inside and out. When he didn't return home that night, he told his mother, and a search for Eric began. No trace of him was ever found. What makes this case so strange began a week before Eric disappeared. Eric was a foreman at a coal mine, and the 2 weeks before he vanished into thin air, he went away on a work trip with some coworkers. When he returned, he was scheduled to go straight back to work at the mine. But the next day he was due to work, his wife phoned his work to say that he developed flu-like symptoms and he would be staying home. For the rest of the week, Eric's wife continued to phone in sick for him. As a foreman, he was supposed to be on call at all times, even if he was ill, and Eric would typically phone in to make sure everything was fine, even when he was away, but no calls came. It wasn't until that Thursday, November 7th, that anybody heard from him. Eric emailed the company to say that he was feeling better. He would spend the following day hunting and then come into work on Saturday. Early the next morning, Eric left on his hunting trip. He was experienced, wore high-quality camouflage clothing, and was going to an area that he knew well. His wife went to see his mother to help decorate a tree and took one of their daughters with her. When it was discovered that Eric was missing, a search of the woods began. Search teams knew about the camouflage Eric was wearing, so they searched multiple times to make sure he hadn't been missed. Sniffer dogs were used, including those that could trace the scent of Eric's hunting equipment. But the only trail that was picked up didn't go into the woods. It simply came back to the house and may have been an old scent. Thermal cameras were used in the woods, but he was not found. There are many theories about what happened to Eric, and it's possible foul play may have been involved. Some have suggested he was accidentally targeted by another hunter in the area, and that they dumped him in the woods out of fear. Others have suggested a crime may have taken place long before the supposed trip. A true possibility is that he decided to start a new life elsewhere, though Eric's family and friends don't believe this is likely to be the case. Jessie Earl vanished from her home in Eastbourne, UK, where she was studying art at the local university. In May of 1980, she had told her parents she would be coming to visit for the weekend. She was supposed to arrive on May 15th. When Jessie was still missing the following afternoon, her parents went to Eastbourne to search for her and found that the bedsit where she lived was empty. For 9 years, her parents continued to ask what happened to their daughter. Jessie had been 22 years old when she vanished and was described by her parents as strong and independent. When they arrived at her home, it appeared to them like she'd just left for a little while, with a cup of coffee on the floor and a book open. It didn't seem like she intended to go for any length of time. A search took place, which included sniffer dogs and a helicopter search over the South Downs, but no sign of the missing person was found. It wasn't until 1989 that her partial remains were found on Beachy Head. At first, police identified the missing person as Lord Lucan, another unsolved case, but it was quickly determined to be that of a woman. Dental records confirmed that this was the mysterious disappearance of Jessie Earl. She was found near a tree. All of her clothing was missing, with the exception of one underwear garment, which was around her wrists. A search of the local area turned up none of Jessie's missing belongings, or any clues as to what happened to her. In her advanced state, it was impossible to tell how she had passed away, and the verdict was left open. Jessie's family were sure that foul play was involved, but local police did not want to classify the case as a true crime. What happened to Jessie remained an unsolved mystery, but her parents campaigned for answers. Finally, in 2000, the case was reviewed and police confirmed someone had taken Jessie's life. But important evidence, like the item of clothing she was found with, had been destroyed. Police believe it's possible Jessie may have known the person responsible for her mysterious disappearance, or at least had met him before. She had told friends about a strange man that she had met while walking once, a scary person who had made her nervous, but he was never identified. It's possible the notorious marauder, Peter Tobin, may have been responsible. He was living in the area at the time of the crime, and what happened to Jessie when she was in the woods would have been in line with what had happened in other crimes that he had committed. However, without evidence, it seems likely the only way this true crime will become a solved mystery is if someone comes forward to reveal the truth. On the 13th of June, 1980, a strange mystery started to unfold in Canberra, Australia, and to this day it remains unsolved. 18-year-old Elizabeth Herford had traveled back to her hometown of Canberra from Queensland, where she was working with her boyfriend as a fruit picker after traveling around Australia. In Canberra, she was staying with her mother while visiting over the June long weekend. On the 13th of June, Elizabeth withdrew her last $1.50 from the bank and took a bus to the ANU bar, where she spent time drinking and playing pool with some of her school friends. At around 8:45 p.m., one of the men in the group asked how she was getting home, and she said that she wasn't sure as she had spent all of her money. He offered to buy her a bus ticket since he would be going on the bus anyway, and he waited for her so that they could walk to the city exchange together. But she never joined him, and he assumed that she'd slipped out of one of the bar's alternative exits. But the following day, her mother hadn't heard from her, and she contacted the police. When she still wasn't found, a search was undertaken that lasted for 2 weeks along the shore of Lake Burley Griffin, but to no avail. Several witnesses came forward to say that they had seen a woman, fitting Elizabeth's description, hitchhiking in the area, while one man said that he had seen a young woman arguing with a man next to a parked car on Commonwealth Avenue at around 9:30 p.m. Another witness stated that he had given a young woman who looked like Elizabeth a ride from Vernon Circle to Coronation Drive. The man who was seen arguing with Elizabeth was tracked down and questioned, but he maintained that the story was made up and that he was at home at the time. The case went cold, and despite yearly follow-ups by Elizabeth's family and unconfirmed sightings, no further clues were ever found, and her case remains an unsolved mystery. Jean Townson was a 34-year-old theatrical costumer in London in 1954. At the time, she lived with her parents in Bempton Drive in South Ruislip, and on the evening of the 14th of September, she was a guest at a social function in the West End. Later that night, she caught the last Central Line train home, and at around 11:45 p.m., she was seen walking on Victoria Road by herself. This was the last time that anyone would see her alive. The following morning, she was found deceased on the north side of Victoria Road. When an autopsy was done, it was revealed that her own scarf had been used to end her life, and suspicion immediately fell on an American serviceman who was based at the South Ruislip station. This came after a resident in the area reported hearing a woman screaming for help, followed by 2 male voices arguing, one of which had an American accent. When the United States Air Force showed reluctance in helping with her case, the local people grew even more suspicious. A few women came forward to report that before the crime was committed, they had been harassed by strange men in the area where Jean was found. One woman, Jacqueline Cliff, reported that she had been approached by a man who was aged around 30 with an unusually high forehead. He also had an American accent and drove an American-type car. Another woman, Joanne Gala, reported that she had been attacked by a man on Victoria Road during the previous weekend. She also described him as having a high forehead, and soon it came to light that similar attacks had occurred in West Germany in the 1950s, suggesting that a British serviceman stationed there may have been responsible. The man with the high forehead would strike once more 3 weeks later when Doris Vanell was attacked outside of North Harrow Tube Station. She saw him board a train at Baker Street and waited for her to get off the train. When she realized that he was planning something, she confronted him and he attacked, but he managed to get away after a brief struggle. No further attacks were ever reported, and no further clues were ever found, leaving Jean's case to remain a scary mystery. The mysterious case of Lieutenant Hubert Chevis occurred at the Blackdown Camp in Camberley, England, on the 21st of June 1931, when he and his wife Frances sat down for dinner. One of Hubert's favorite dishes was partridge, and that evening, it was exactly what Frances was serving. But after taking one bite of the dish, Hubert made a face and pushed his plate away, stating that it tasted horrible. Not long after dinner, he started feeling ill and was soon struck with seizures and partial paralysis in certain parts of his body. Before long, he was also experiencing severe abdominal pain, and they called for medical help. After being examined, both Hubert and Frances were sent to the nearest hospital, where Frances managed to recover, but Hubert only made it to the next morning before passing away. When an autopsy was done, it revealed that he'd been a victim of strychnine poisoning. This prompted a police investigation, and when their home was searched, no poison was found in any of the other food that was served that night. When investigators asked to see the partridges that were being served, the cook informed them that they'd been destroyed in the oven, as she'd been instructed to do. This left police no option but to trace the path that the partridges took before being served at the house. They questioned the butcher from whom they were bought, but the partridges in the butchery were found to be clean. At the house, the birds had been kept in a meat safe, as was the norm at the time. They were then removed by the cook to be prepared for dinner, leading them to the conclusion that the meat had been poisoned while it was in the meat safe. On the day of Hubert's funeral, his father received a telegram from someone named Jay Hardigan, who was staying at the Dublin Hotel, with a message that simply read, "Hooray, hooray, hooray." Police were certain that the killer had sent the message, as Hubert's demise had not been reported in the newspapers yet. Investigators contacted the hotel, but found that no one by that name was staying there at the time. A few days later, a newspaper called the Daily Sketch published a photo of the telegram, and soon they received a postcard from Jay Hardigan asking why they had published it. 4 days later, Hubert's father also received a postcard from the same person, with this one stating, quote, "It's a mystery they will never solve. Jay Hardigan, hooray." Police attempted to ascertain a motive for the crime, but everyone they spoke to said Hubert was well liked, not only socially, but within the military as well. No similar poisonings were carried out again, ruling out the possibility of a serial poisoner, and no further clues were ever found. Jay Hardigan, whoever they were, got away with murder, leaving a creepy, unsolved mystery in their wake. One of the most infamous unsolved true crime stories to ever come out of Queens, New York, occurred in 1964, and soon it became a media sensation. Kitty Genevies, a 28-year-old bartender, was driving home after her shift at around 2:30 a.m. on the 13th of March. She arrived at her house at about 3:15 a.m. and parked her car in the parking lot of Kew Gardens Long Island Railroad Station. She walked the 100 feet to her apartment's door, which was located in an alley behind the building, where she was confronted by a man named Winston Mosley. She realized that he was brandishing a sharpened blade, and she fled to the front of the building, but Mosley caught up with her and attacked her with the blade, causing her to scream for help. One of her neighbors, Robert Moser, heard her cries and yelled at Mosley to leave her alone. Mosley got scared and ran off, leaving Kitty to slowly make her way to the back of the building again. Witnesses reported seeing Mosley drive away, only to return a few moments later. He shielded his face with a wide-brimmed hat while searching the area, and eventually he found Kitty, who had been unable to make it to her apartment. Out of the sight of any witnesses, Mosley robbed her of $49 and attacked her with the blade again before fleeing once more. Sophia Farrar, a close friend of Kitty's, found her in the alleyway and stayed with her until an ambulance arrived. Kitty was taken to the hospital, but she passed away on the way. Mosley was arrested for stealing a television later that same week, and when his car, a white Corvair, was found to match that of Kitty's attacker, he was asked about the incident and he confessed. He stated that he had spotted her at a traffic light while he was sitting in his car. Kitty's attacker had been caught, but despite intense questioning, he never revealed his motive, and to this day, no one knows what prompted him to end her life. In 1902, 22-year-old Rose Harsett was living in Sussex, England. She was working as a servant at Providence House, where her life would be ended, sparking a mystery that has still not been solved. Rose was well liked, especially by the men in the area, and she had started having an affair with William Gardiner, a married choir master with 6 children. He and Rose had been caught together by 2 of the church's staff, and had been warned by the church, despite Gardiner's claims that it was all a lie. On the 31st of May, Rose received a letter reading, quote, "I will try to see you tonight at 12 o'clock at your place. If you put a light in your window at 10 o'clock for about 10 minutes, then you can take it out again. "Don't have a light in your room at 12, as I will come around the back." When her father, William, went to her quarters the next day, he found that she'd been attacked by someone with a blade and she was no longer alive. Her attacker had unsuccessfully attempted to set her alight with paraffin from a lamp after the fact. When the house was searched, the letter was quickly found, and Gardner became their prime suspect. When his handwriting was compared to that on the note, they decided that it was a match. Further evidence that pointed at Gardner included the bottle in which the paraffin was kept. It was a bottle usually used for medicine, and Gardner's children had been prescribed that same medicine recently. Also, a piece of paper that was used to attempt to light the paraffin was found to be from a newspaper that Gardner subscribed to. Witnesses also reported seeing Gardner standing outside of his house, staring at Providence House. A light had been briefly lit in the window, just as the note instructed. Gardner was, however, found not guilty of the crime, and Rose's attacker has still not been identified, leaving her case as a mystery that may never be solved. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.